IETF's a battery killer.
I believe right away to this, or
Hmm?
you go right away after the meeting.
No.
Maybe we could have like 5 minutes just to wrap up and see what
Mhm.
we do.
I want to be in Cuddle afterwards. I want to be in Cuddle afterwards.
So, yeah, right. The names are nice. Yeah, I think I will, to this, I will just go to check out. Yes.
Okay, good morning. I just got a last-minute slide update, so sorry for the delay. So this is the second meeting of the core working group, the second official meeting. All the things I already said apply. You really want a microphone? Okay. It's just so familial setting here. Okay, well, we do have. Is anybody coming in from remote? Nobody's coming from remote. Okay, so the note well does apply. One thing I forgot to say in the working group status on Wednesday, and I apologize, is there's actually another RFC out there. The co-op no response option, I should have mentioned that. That's an independent submission. That's why it's just not on my list of things that I have to consider. Akbar, you want something? Is there something?
Yes, Carson, thanks for pointing that out. And the other question I talked briefly offline to you is, will this be pointed to from the working group page and the co-op.technology page and I guess other resources so that people know it's available? Because I guess there was some interest in the community for it.
Right. So I think those of us who run sites about co-op should just make sure that the pointers for this are in there. And I think that's a very good point. Okay, I mean, it is visible in the option registry, so if you know where to look, you can see it, but it's a little bit hidden to look in the INR pages. So before we go into the agenda, I wanted to quickly pass the microphone to Mark.
Hi, everybody. Mark Nottingham. As some of you might remember, I've been working on the back burner for a long, long time on a BIS document for RFC 5988, which is web linking. Talking to some folks here and looking at the issues list, I think it's almost ready to go and become more formal and actually be a BIS that we work on. I'm not exactly sure what the venue for that is going to be, but we're talking about with the ADs. So this is just a heads up. If folks in this community have input for what we need out of that BIS of that document, please get in touch either on the issues list or email, or grab me in the hall before I run and get a plane. But just do keep in mind it's a BIS document, so it's limited in scope in terms of what we can do. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. So 5988 is the technical basis for 6690, the link format document. And from the top of my head, the most frequent gripe I have heard is that there are too few registries. So that's maybe one thing that we could be addressed in such a work item. Is there a point for having such a registry? So that's one discussion.
Parameters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting piece of work. So this is the agenda for today. We have lots of stuff here. We'll quickly talk about ZenML. I think Andy is not coming at all. He said he had to leave at 10:30, and we might have moved things around to make that possible. Okay. So we will do the management stuff next. We have a pretty important submission from OCF we want to talk about, the redirect thing, and then we have a little bit of new work. We probably won't have the flex time because we have leftover from Wednesday. So we should quickly revisit the CoAP over TCP issue, the issue 11 that we had been discussing for so long on Wednesday. And we have two document updates that we probably just want to do quickly before going into the other things. So Brian, do you want to make a summary of us what has happened in the meantime on CoAP over TCP? You're not sure?
No, I'm saying I will share on the
Yeah, essentially what I was hoping you were saying is we do this on the mailing list now, and there seems to be a way forward to discuss this on the mailing list. And okay. Yeah, so I don't think there's anything we need to discuss here today, but the point is if you care about this issue, then please pay attention to what's going on the mailing list. Okay, then Christian, where's Christian? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'll just quickly go over the progress on the drafts that I've been working on with regards to the interfaces and dynamic linking. Between Berlin and now, I've done an update to the DynLink document. So basically, I've tweaked the document structure to hopefully make it flow a little bit better. When I was doing the updates, I noticed that we were talking about different methods that you could use to synchronize the state. So there was observed methods and polling and whatnot. So rather than trying to enunciate those every time we talked about trying to do updates, I've introduced the term state synchronization, which sort of leads to those three. So hopefully that's made it a little bit easier to read. There's a description of the different binding attributes have been updated. I think that was one of the things that we discussed several months ago, that the actual attributes, it was sort of unclear how they were actually used, and we needed some information. So I've tried to beef up the information around those attributes. So I'd encourage people to take a look and see that if that's what they thought, how they would work. I've also added a new clause describing the interaction between the attributes. So that was something which was lacking, to see which one you could have and how they interrelated to each other. There was also quite a lot of duplication between the observe attributes and the binding attributes. They were basically identical, so I just removed one set and just sort of said see earlier, and that's made the draft a little bit more readable as well. There was an example of the use of binding tables. I've added some text on deletion, and I've also formalized the IAMA considerations section. There was a comment from, I think, Hannes saying that we needed to do that. So the next step is really just if people could have a look at the draft and confirm that the attributes work how they think they should work. So I'd like to get that sorted out before we start adding new attributes to the list. I've talked with Michael before on the list about adding some a couple of other attributes. I noticed just recently in the Costa draft on HSML, there was some text around wrapping GT and LT, so I have to check and maybe align with that. I did notice in the draft too that according to our interface description registration rules, that stuff out of the IETF should be core.binding. I think in a few drafts we just use the name without core at the front, so we'll need to do that. And as I mentioned, well, we need some additional attributes related to initialization and bands. So that's it for that. Any questions? No?
So who has read a recent version of this document? Michael has. Jaime has. So, I mean, it's a very short document. That's a problem with these short documents. They just fall through the cracks, and I think everybody should spend those 10 minutes to read this document and see what it is about.
I think it's worthwhile in light of discussions we had yesterday about some of these observed patterns and things like that. So, and bindings that will come into that sort of work. So I would encourage people to have a look. Yep.
Plus one for read recent version on Jabber.
Okay. All right. So the interfaces draft. So there were a number of updates there since Berlin. So the introduction, the abstract were updated just to focus more on the interfaces side of things. In a few places there were various definitions of what a collection was, and Hannes had some comments around it that this was unclear. So hopefully I've put now that into sort of one section and got some looked at some other RFCs for definition of collections and have merged those into the current draft. So hopefully that's a lot clearer. I think in the texts we refer to interface type, and so I've changed globally to interface description as that's what's used in RFC 6690. There's also a section just about updating future interfaces. I've removed that. There was sort of there's no information in that. I've added the IANA consideration section, so there was just a few words in there, so that's now more formally defined. And probably the biggest change is that I've added Appendix A, the current usage of interfaces and function sets. There's some comments from Hannes asking where is this used and how is it used. So I went through and looked at OCF, various drafts from here, 1M to M and that sort of thing, to see how they used interfaces and function sets, etc. So in terms of issues, so the first point there is really what I'd like to sort of see if we can get agreement out of this meeting. When I was looking, the use of function sets was that varied and wide that nobody did the same thing twice for function sets. And it seems to be useful. You would have to go to a lot of detail to actually define what they are and how they are and have templates and everything. And that seems to be a fairly big job, and I don't know whether people have the wherefore all wanting to do that. So it seems that you know, we could quite easily have this document just focusing on what interfaces are, and probably could remove the function description. So that's one thing I'd like to ask the meeting of people to see whether they're okay with moving that function sets from the document. The other thing which I noticed is that RFC 6690 introduces the IF attribute, but it has a procedure about the registration, but that's only with regards to the name. As now that I'm the IANA designated expert for the registrations, to me this seems a bit odd that all that I need to do is check the name in a document. They could have utter rubbish in there and I'd still have to register it. So I'm wondering if we should be a little bit more elaborating on what needs to be in the registrations. Like, you know, does it have to have REST methods, etc. So that's something, again, which I'd like to have some discussion, maybe not here, but on the mailing list. So the other thing I noticed is the core resource directory talks about interfaces, but doesn't have interface description identifiers. And I think the confusion is that it talks about interaction models and then calls it an interface. So there's some, in our documents, I think we sort of mixed terminology a little bit around interfaces and interaction models. And I think we could probably do some effort to clean that up, and it would make things a little bit easier so to understand the documents. The other issue is the OCF is also, they have several interfaces which in general are very similar to the ones we have defined in this document. So they have slightly different names and slightly different meanings. So should we be perhaps aligning with OCF so that we have, you know, a one set of interfaces that do the same behavior or have the same naming. Also, I haven't found anywhere in the literature about anything to do with versioning or update of interface descriptions. I assume you just register a new one if you want to up version, but that's not mentioned anywhere, so we probably need to cover that. The COMI draft needs to be added as it uses a function set and interfaces, and also the cost of drafters using interfaces or interaction models, so that's, we need to check that. So yeah, really next step is whether we remove the function sets completely or remove it and put it in a separate document. Any thoughts on that?
Michael Koster, Samsung Smart Things. Yeah, I think we have had a number of hallway discussions, and I think the consensus is to remove all of the function set nomenclature because of issues that you said. It's not really super well defined, and people aren't really using it consistently. And I think there's just a way to use a few words to describe what's being accomplished, as you said, interaction model or whatever. So I think it's either we go and define what a function set is and use it everywhere and update a bunch of drafts, or in the few places that it's now used relatively inconsistently, we can remove it and replace it with descriptive language that doesn't try to create a title, capital function, capital set. Okay, and as far as the interface descriptions, it seems like given the state of who's using it and what they're doing with it, we might want to focus the interfaces draft on defining what an interface does, how to create and register one, what kind of things you need to think about to make one, and then give the OCF ones as examples. The OCF ones are already registered on IANA. So the only interfaces that are actually registered are the OCF ones. I'm not sure we should try to register core interfaces that do something different than the OCF ones, especially given that the names are the same. Well, the names aren't the same. One's OCF dot whatever IF, and the other is, or sorry, OIC.IF.LL, and there's one core.LL. So the fact that LL is kind of used in duplicate seems to be, we should do something about that.
Yeah.
I had a third point, but I forgot.
And it also feeds back a little into the draft, which has been discussed at the end of the meeting on the interface prefixes. That sort of ties into this issue too, that, you know, with OCF and having the prefix and, you know, the suffix then is the same. So do people look at the two and say, well, they should be the same, and that sort of thing. So we need to consider that also.
Okay, to me that seems like a good way forward. So if you think this is the way to do,
Okay.
then
All right. So I'll do an update of the draft after this meeting to capture that.
right. So you can just stay there. Just do the next.
Okay, so the Sentinel-based time offset is, hopefully people will remember this from Berlin. Ari had a slide on that going over, indicating whether we should include it in the working draft or not, and I think we said we'd have it as a separate one. And one of the aims was to test the extension of extensibility of Sentinel. Did I press twice, did I? Okay, so The reason for it is for use in constant time increasing sequences. So this is when you have a 7-mel pack with records that have a constant time step. So for example, 10, 20, 30, 40. And to that, for us, it seems to be superfluous to have to include the time at each record when you could simply just include what the step is. So what we're proposing is a new base attribute called BTO, which would allow you to indicate an offset between the records. The first record in the pack would have the base time, or if there was no base time, it would be basically 0, and then every subsequent record would be incremented by the BTO. There are some issues with this that have been pointed out, and I'll raise them here. One is that you can't have 2 records with the same time, effectively. So this means that you can't have 2 different types of measurements in the sequence. So if you had like a voltage measurement and a current measurement, then due to the rule of BTO, that they would have a time that would be incremented by the step. There's also usage in the CENMAL document where you have basically a negative time offset. So the last record in your CENMAL pack has time 0, and every record before then has a negative offset. So this wouldn't really be possible with the current proposal. Also, the proposal, you can't have T within a record. There are potential workarounds for all these, but they add complexity, so I've just basically assumed that we won't do it, and we'll just go for a very simple approach and have basically a 1 measurement type. One thing that isn't in there, which brought up in discussion with Ari, is what happens if an endpoint doesn't understand BTOs. So effectively, you'll have a series of measurements without any time. So I need to have some text in the draft around that. Okay, so one of the issues was with regards to the extensibility. When I first did it, it wasn't really obvious what I had to do. So I worked with the CENMAL authors, and there was an update to address some of the comments that I had. But probably the biggest thing I noticed is that it's really asymmetric in terms of the work that you have to do to extend CBOR and extend the XML. The CBOR is very easy. You just have a name string and that's it. And you're done. Whereas the XML, you have to redefine the XML by copying all the previously registered extensions, add your extension, then you have to update the XSD schema and give it a new option number. So then this option number then becomes like a protocol version. Then by doing this, it seems that because you now have like an option number and you have all this syntax, you're implying that implementations must support all the attributes in that syntax. Whereas the CBOR, the way it's written, you just have it implies you support the base set, and then each new addition is an option. So to me, there seems to be some sort of mismatch in those two. So the question would be, how do you indicate which attributes are actually then supported? The extensibility thing is something I think we have to sort of work on and see if that's what people are wanting. So really the next step is, are people interested in this, and would they be happy to see this move forward? Thank you.
So who has read a version of this document?
Ari Keränen, just can we go to the extensibility slide, because I think that's the, let's say, remaining issue in the base CNML spec. That are we doing right? And thanks a lot for doing this work, because this really lets us experiment. Okay, are we doing the extension points right? And you really found already some good issues, and we addressed some. But yes, on the CBOR versus EXI, the best of our knowledge, that's the way how you can extend EXI. And if someone knows a better way than to redefine the full schema by adding the new new parts there every single time we had a new extension. We'd like to hear about it, but it seems that's the way to do it. Luckily, CBOR has more easier way to do it, but even in CBOR, well, yes, the CBOR implementation can parse the document even though it doesn't understand, even though there are extensions which it hasn't seen before if you use the string method. And that's why we are defining in the draft that only they get tag numbers, using the right terminology here, only for the current labels you have numeric tags, but then for all the extensions you would need to use strings just to address this issue so that you don't have to actually understand what is the value there. So that's the current model that we have for ZenML extensibility, and of course would like to hear if there are better ways to do it, or especially clarify what we want to achieve. I don't know, do we have any EXI experts who maybe have a better view on this? Is there a better way to do it except redefine the full schema every single time?
I think that's a bit of a general problem we're having with this XE stuff. There are only a few people in W3C who know how the stuff actually is supposed to work, and it's sometimes a bit difficult to get this in there. But I think in this case we pretty much have understood what to do, and maybe we should try to find some XE expert and run them by it.
Yeah, I don't know whether we say something like, for each, when it comes to the XE, if you do extend it, that the previously defined attributes use like the base number. So all the attributes we have in the ZenML draft today would use the, basically say it's option A, and then you only ever add one attribute when you up version. So then when you use that attribute, then you only use that version. So like if the BTO would be B, and then I think you've got a proposal to add some metadata and extension, so that would be C, but all the previous ones, the BTO would still use B version, and then the existing ones would still use A version when they're actually signaling. I don't know.
I'm almost not sure actually. I haven't thought it that all the way through. But I think if you support BTO and you support whatever new one, you would use C or D, but that would of course imply that all future extensions or whatever implementation supports future extensions also supports BTO, because probably BTO will be the first one to claim a new schema.
Yeah, but this is a problem between CBOR and with the CBOR. There's no.
But there's a difference between understanding that this is okay. I can understand as in parse it, which CBOR does, but then I understand actually to handle it, and that's a valid point. Now we could actually be forking what it does because if you support schema ID B, you probably imply you understand what to do with BTO, whereas in CBOR you can say, hey, it's a BTO, through and through.
Yeah.
I think we should make it very explicit that the schema ID just says, I can decode this, and doesn't mean I actually implement all the options that are in that schema.
Okay, then we should clarify.
Yeah.
And that actually raises another issue. Do we need a way to signal, hey, I saw something I cannot handle, or I don't know how to handle. I can parse it, but I have no idea what to do with it. But now we say you just ignore everything, which then results in the issue that you also mentioned. Do we need also a way to do something else? Do we need an error code saying I saw something but I didn't understand it?
In COAP we have elective and critical options, and right now everything in ZenML is elective.
Yeah. And is that a good model? I mean, yeah, that's right now what we have. Ignore everything you didn't understand. And is that fine with everyone? No one sees any issues? Or would you need a way to say, I saw a BTO, I didn't understand it. Please tell me something.
This is Dave Robin. Yes, if everything is optional, understand for parsing, that's great. But I really do think this is If I see BTO, but I don't support BTO, my parser saw it, it got to me, but I don't do anything with that option. I have to reject the message somehow, because you think I got it, you think I understood it, but I actually didn't, because I didn't apply the time offsets right. So I have to complain. And in my world of BACnet, we say optional functionality not supported, which is an error code that says, yes, I see that. I see that's an option. I don't do that. So it's a generic thing. And it's, if a new option comes in that I don't even know what it is, but I know it's there and I know it's optional, I can send back optional functionality not supported. The reason for this, the reason this is a good thing, is that the client who sent me this packet can go, oh, you're one of those guys. Fall back to version 1, make a much bigger packet, send it to you. Now you accept it. So anytime you extend something like this for efficiency or to make something better on the wire, but there's a fallback, think about that fallback and let the client know, I didn't like what you sent me, but try again, and I'll try again with the simpler method.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's sort of getting by the last point. How do you actually indicate what is really supported? So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that happens a lot of times. There you get these read multiple messages and says, I can't do that. You go, okay, one by one, here we go. There's usually a fallback.
So the observation would be that BTO actually is a critical extension.
Yeah, seems so, because in this case you would be misunderstanding. So then the next question: how do we indicate that it's a critical? Also, it's useful to have the model. Yes, you can ignore those that are not critical.
I'm sure we all remember must understand from so.
Ah.
What it's for. Here's something you don't know, but if you must understand it, you must reject it.
Yeah. So we start all with X. Because now we already have this, like the base value start with B. So we could use that model. We reserve a character that says, okay, this is something you need to understand. That's one way to do it. Or we add metadata that says, this is what you need to understand. But what is and this, of course, does add complexity.
I don't think we have to solve this here. So I think we just sent.
Yeah, I think we can take it offline.
Send the Sentinel authors back to the drawing board on that particular issue, possibly having a critical flag somewhere. Two. Three.
Michael Koster, Samsung Smart Things. I'm not sure, this is totally on topic, but I think it's a good discussion. Is there a notion of SenML validation, and how does a validator work? And if we add things like this, we need to think about that, I guess. Right. So there are some rules for validation. How do we add this idea of critical or elective or whatever they are options to that? I think trying to encode it in the text is a little too clever. I think we should find a better solution than that. A little too, dependent on sort of overloading string parsing. Maybe there's a better way to do that. I'll think about it. I know. It's like I think it seems like there might be something there, because we talked about a number of other things too, like in Berlin about extending for having URL format names, right? And it just occurred to me we might just use URN there, but I don't know if that's going to work either, right? But so something like that, I don't know.
Okay. And then of course, for the record, the other option is that no, we just don't do it at all. We keep it very simple. But so it's a trade-off on, and by not doing it, I mean we don't support optional and must understand records. However, this would make this kind of extensions impossible. So, but if there is a good way, and we can come up with one fast, and I mean like before Chicago, way before Chicago, because we wanna last call SenML. It's been out too long, way too long already.
Sorry.
So if we can come up with such way, fast pace, I think, worth exploring. Otherwise, I would say let's keep it simple and maybe lose some functionality on that because of that.
Okay, so I think we already spent most of the time of the cinema segment, but maybe you can run through the other slides quickly, because I think that was the most important question about
Yes.
cinema.
Okay, so quick update on the CenML 2. What we did since last time, we changed the name. It's still CenML, but really it wasn't a markup language ever. So now it is called media types for sensor measurement lists. Small, but I think an important thing to change. So there was always CenML has supported actuator usage, but it was pretty underdefined. Now there's a whole section discussing how you do actuation usage and a set of examples to show you how to do that. Also, we were missing base sum from the earlier versions, so base sum now works in a similar way as base time. So you have a base value, and then you define the offset to that base value in your records. What is the sum if you're using the sum functionality? And there's a whole bunch of clarifications. For example, resolved records was called something else actually earlier, but this is the normalized form of all CenML records where you add your base values and you do so that every single record becomes an independent record and not dependent on the earlier records like the base values. And then there was a clarification on the discussion. So why no new CBOR numeric values? And that was the reason. So if you want to make a node that can convert between CBOR and JSON, it actually needs to understand all these numeric values. And making one just based on the base RFC or the base specification would not be possible if there were possibility to also include new numeric values. So the new values will be using the string method of CBOR. It is slightly less optimal. You use 1 or 2 bytes more, but it's not a massive difference. So we have to figure out it's worth it to do it this way.
So Carsten Bormann from the other mic, but not really. So this is a function that a CBOR to JSON converter can have that an XML to XC converter cannot have. And I think it's still nice to have it.
Okay, and then the media type registration considerations, they were updated heavily because they were missing some information. But now it should be containing everything we need, except for one point which we will come to in a bit. Okay, we had the extensibility discussion already, so I'll skip this one. However, one thing that we did realize just a few days ago when working on a different draft and things in RG is that, do we want to support URI fragments? So the point here is that if you have a URI fragment, that's the hash something in the end of the URI, and you can use that to point to a part of a resource. So this is all client-side processing. The server, if you use a request with a URI fragment, you will still get the full representation. But on the client-side application, you can refer to a part of a representation. So one proposal was that we could actually include this also in CenML, and one way to model this would be after RFC 97-111. So the idea, if you look at the examples, would be that at the end of the URI, you would have hash rec equals something. And the something could be a number, would be like 3 would be referring to the third CenML record in a pack. 4-7 would be records 4 to 7, or 4-* would be 4 until the last one. So it's the same model used by the RFC 7111.
Michael Koster, Samsung Smart Things. So does this impact the statements that we make in RFC 6690 about not supporting fragments? And I think that's where it is. There's a couple of places maybe where we say no fragments in core references or URI references rather. Yeah, it's not a reference per se because it doesn't go on the wire. Does it affect? Do we have to change what we're saying about fragments?
That's a good point. I don't remember the exact text on that. But
I don't either. I think it's in 6690, but I didn't go look it up before I came to the mic.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it could be that we don't use in that we don't use in web links the fragment.
Well, it's not a link; it's a reference. Yeah, it's not. It would never show up in a link. It would only ever show up in a reference.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. And maybe we need to look into that part too. Thanks.
And 6690 does talk about references. 5988, I guess MNOT's not here anymore, but 5988 has some, I think, guidance about references too, or one of those. I don't know if it's exactly that draft.
Looks like the word fragment doesn't occur in 6690, so maybe you mean a different one.
I mean, the base co-op RFC said that you don't, there's no fragments, but that means there's no fragments on wire, because there's no fragment option, because you wouldn't send it to wire.
So RFC 2616, the original HTTP RFC, or the one that was valid 15 years, that had a bug. It didn't show the fragment identifier in the syntax for HTTP URIs. And we just copied that bug because 7252 is based on 2616. That bug was, pardon me? It's a bug. It was fixed in 7230. And we kind of should consider 7230 overriding this. The numbering is a bit strange. 7230 is 1 year younger than 7252 because 7252 was stuck on some security squabbles for a year. So that's the weird numbering here. So I think the text, there is text in 7252 that discourages fragments, and that's probably correct for things like single sensor measurements. Having fragments in there doesn't make sense, but SNML kind of goes into a different direction.
Okay, something a bit different is, it'd be good to actually have a use case for this. I mean, it talks about not sent on the wire, and it's sort of internal to a box, so it'd be interesting to see how you're actually proposing to use this.
Yeah, so the whole idea came like 2 days ago, and we are not even sure ourselves if there is a real valid use case for this. That is why it was more of a question to the group. Before we disallow this, do we see some value there?
So you all know how long CSV has been around, and the RFC that shows how to do fragment IDs for CSV is 7111. So it took them a while to find out that makes sense too. Yes.
Are we doing on time? Oh, okay.
This is Henk Berkers from the Fraunhofer. There might be merit to this because people might use this batch mechanism to transport something else than sensor readings that are kind of inertial intent, but solve congestions on the PubSub site as a publisher with the PubSub draft, for example. And at some point, subscribers might not need the whole batch if it's going into the thousands. And so referencing offsets seems to be a feasible way to start at some point you misinterpreted something. Or so.
Okay, I was wondering, but does that require the other endpoint and also seeing the reference? Because this doesn't happen here. Only client local processing that is done.
Yeah, maybe make it available on the resource side also.
Okay, because I mean that's not possible with the fragment. Then it would be some other
I
way
might
doing
have
it.
misunderstood the scope here.
Okay, so this is only on the client side, never sent to the server.
Michael Koster again. I just another comment. Yes, I think in general it would be a desirable feature, and I think it would be useful, and I would mention it in HSML if it were available.
Okay, so I guess we're gonna have to take that one on the list. But here some are saying there's some value on it, but maybe we need a real use case. So I would suggest we spend if there's a real use case, please let us know. Send it on the list. If one doesn't show up, maybe it's not worth it to do. Okay, excellent. Then a few more issues very fast. One question we got on the media type review is that would SNML ever be copy pasted around? So, and if it would, there would be need for these macOS uniform type identifiers and Windows clipboard names. We were like, well, maybe. Doesn't hurt. So what we are suggesting, okay, let's say to, okay, please allocate those identifiers for SendML, and we don't see any harm there. And it could be useful in some environments to have that kind of support. Okay, I see shrugging and nodding in the audience. So okay, so we'll go forward and ask the guys to register us those values. And final issue that was discussed in some earlier meetings is the how to describe the metadata, and if you want to have a new label for describing this. We had some discussions with the authors, and yeah, on surface it looks pretty simple, but it goes actually a bit complicated in the end. You need to, for example, if you want to support full UTF-8 character set, you need to go things like language tags and everything. So it is actually a bit more complicated than you initially think. So what we are suggesting here is that, okay, let's explore this as an extension. Anyway, it's not something that majority of the cases would need. It would be kind of a corner case maybe, but in some time it could be useful. So let's do it as an extension, see how it works out, and if it seems a good idea, we'll publish it as such. Okay, so it wouldn't be part of the base spec. I can answer. Almost. Sorry.
So just in terms of the extension thing, are there any existing attributes that you would need to update the character set of to include an internet?
No.
Okay.
This would be the only one supporting the character sets, because REST is, well, more restricted. So for example, the name has only URI characters.
Okay. No, that's all right, because I'll just be concerned if you want to try and update an existing attribute, how that's done.
No.
That's fine.
But very, very good point. Yes, we shouldn't do that.
Jari Arkas wanted to support the idea that let's do extensions as opposed to putting this in the base, and more generally maybe let's not add kitchen sink to SendML before it's done and it to be shipped, and yes, we can extend it later.
Thanks, Jari. Okay, so I hear people supporting this as an extension, so we'll go forward with that. That's all.
Thank you. Alex. So we have two working group drafts on the COMI side, and a third draft that isn't quite a working group draft yet. And one of my objectives for this meeting would be to get there. So Alex, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll try to go pretty fast over these two, the first two drafts, which are the Young over CBOR and the SIDS, which are working group items now. And I'll start with a very short overview of where we are with this set of three base drafts. So as a reminder, you have a management thing, a manager, which is the client, and the server. So you have your normal stack here, and the three drafts which we are addressing here are the COMI, which will be discussed today much more in detail by Peter, which is the function set, or the way we actually send the co-op, the way the co-op requests are formed. We have also the Young to CBOR draft, which actually says how the CBOR is how CBOR data is represented. And we have the SID draft, which specifies how do you map your long string identifiers to a much shorter numeric identifiers. So what happened since the last IETF? A very short overview. We had this, so there were two design teams, basically the COMI and the COOL design team. And since the last time, the two teams worked very hard. So right now there is only one proposal and only one document, which is the COMI document. So there was a lot of work that was done, in a very rapid fashion. And so now the whole work moves to the mailing list. So we're very happy with what happened, and we are please encouraged to read these drafts. The Young to CBOR is almost complete from functional point of view, so please do read it. And the SID draft So right now we have the first version as a working group item, and we feel that it can be completed by the next IETF. The cool draft will continue to exist in some way, but it will be for much more advanced things, and we don't feel that it must be adopted for the moment. So more experimental stuff going there. So this is like the very high level overview, and now going into the two working group items. The first one is the Young to CBOR draft, the Young to CBOR mapping. So once again, you have a Young schema, and it gives you how you represent the different items in this Young schema as a CBOR elements. So you have simple types in Young schema, and these map to CBOR items. You have unions, which is a special kind of thing, and here we introduced 4 tagged CBOR as 4 tags to tag the CBOR items, because you need to, for example, in CBOR we can encode different Young things as integer, and when we send this over the line, on the other side, sometimes if it is a union, we cannot distinguish what it is. We just get an integer, and for this type we need to tag them explicitly to say, okay, this was an enumeration initially, so that we can reconstruct it. But we don't want to do this every time, because then it will be inefficient. We do this only for the unions. So we have some kind of identities here, which are either the string names or the SIDs. And we have these complex things that are collections, lists, or structures that you can build. And these are naturally mapped to CBOR maps or CBOR arrays. So read the draft, everything is here. So this is like a very short overview of what's happening from the last time. So we discussed lots of issues, and most of them, or all, I think, were fixed. So one of the questions was about how do we represent the decimal 64 type that is a Young type. How do we represent this in CBOR? So we decided to use CBOR decimal fractions, which is less efficient than just using an integer, but it allows us to every time to reconstruct to have no ambiguity in actually reading the data. So for the unions, as I said, we added CBOR tags, and we need to allocate these CBOR tags. And for the enumerations, we always encode these things as integers. So the conclusion on this draft is almost ready. So from functional point of view, everything is there. Right now, so Peter sent a pretty detailed overview on the mailing list. We feel that the thing that the draft could be eventually improved is, if you read it and, improve the readability, look at the examples. Are the examples sufficient enough? Are they explicit enough? Are there some things that make you, okay, I don't really completely understand this? So our goal is to have a finalized version by January, and to have an intermediate interop in February, so a virtual one, so that we know that we have everything that is necessary, and have an interop meeting in Chicago. And here we hope to have also the COMI function, so that we have like the fully functional system interop in Chicago. And here we will, of course, profit from help from you guys and from Karsten in actually organizing this. So, as I said, please read the draft on this.
Question.
Yeah.
Is it worthwhile to state as a goal that we want to tag the next version as an implementation draft?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Yeah.
So we had this discussion on Wednesday, whether SCORP was ready to be an implementation draft.
Yeah.
And I'm getting from what you're saying that this is become an implementation draft in January.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this would also be the trigger to hand this over to NetMod and say, look at this.
Definitely.
We are not planning to change it, but if we have to, tell us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So if you want to look at it, now is the right time to give us feedback, and we're pretty open to this. So if there are no questions there, I'll move on to the next presentation, which is the new document that has been adopted a couple of weeks ago, I think, which is the schema item identifier. So this is shortening the names to to numbers. And actually, it is a very fun thing. So if you really want to have fun, I would encourage you to look into this draft a little bit more. So what's happening here is that in Young, everything is, you have these string identifiers, which could map to URIs. So these Young identifiers are assigned to basically everything. So your modules identified them, the submodules, the features. So the data nodes are, you have RPCs and actions, notifications, identities. So you can do a lot of things with this. They're long, and what we do is we assign them to a short number, and so they are allocated by range. So I'll talk about this a little bit later. So what is a SID? It's a number. It is assigned to items, as I said. So all the previous things get a number in this scheme. And so this number is used instead of the rescon for Young name. A couple of properties here. An assigned number never changes. So it is very stable. If you have, for example, thing-to-thing communication, you can you can just fire up the number, and if the other thing implements this module, has this item, you'll get an answer. Otherwise, you'll have like a 404 or something like this. The initial space is on which we're designing is 32 bits, but because we're actually using CBOR as a way of encoding things, it can grow up in a pretty natural fashion. So what is also in the SID draft, it is actually a way to do this mapping. So you have it is a mapping between the textual identifier and this numeric identifier. And in the draft, you have how do you actually describe this. So it's a JSON file. Here you have a very short extraction of it. So the type of so here you have the real identifier. So it is an identity, and this is the SID that was the SID number that was allocated. So the goal is for every Young module that you want to be able to use in ComI, you will generate a file like this, and then this should never change. So look at so we have already a working code on this. There is a pyoung plugin that actually generates this file automatically for you. It allows you to update. So if you make modifications to your a Young module, it allows you to update this. So you have the tools there. And there is already we're already running some kind of an initial registry in GitHub. So you can go there and you can start working. Yep.
Hi, Rick Taylor. I like the work you're doing with this. I'm not actually that involved with the co-op stuff, but I'm looking at it for applicability in DTN, where we have the same problems that we want to use Yang, but we just can't handle these enormous strings. What I didn't realize from reading the draft, because I must admit I only saw it late and I scanned it quite quickly, is you have a flat ID space, so everything is uniquely named. We've been looking at an alternative approach, but obviously we're trying to compare and contrast, where we're using effectively an array of identifiers. So you only identify at each level in the tree. Do you have a concern that, I know you say, oh, we're using CBOR, so we're not going to run out of bits, really. But aren't you just going to get lost in your numbers? You're just going to end up generating so many SIDs rather than structuring it at all?
Yes, so we had, so thank you very much. We had lots of discussions on this topic. One of the things that we said is we want to move complexity compile time and outside of the end devices, outside of the network. So what we are doing here is actually on the next slide, we put a registry system where we are actually going to go and register all these things, and in a very efficient way. So we don't want to, okay, we have 32 bits, which are 4 billion initially, so that is pretty good, all right? But we don't want to be wasteful with this. So we have this two-tier schema, and yeah, I don't think it will be.
One of the considerations, sorry, follow on. which I think Ed behind me is probably going to ask exactly the same thing, is when we started to look at dotted numbers, effectively arrays of numbers, you can then move into a sort of a common prefix compression. So you can say, I'm talking about just this subtree. Say it starts with 1800 and then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8. And it actually gives you some compression in that way, because a lot of the sort of netconf, net modeling style operations are talking about just little subtrees rather than give me the whole model, particularly in a constrained environment. Just a consideration.
Yeah, we do this with deltas. Okay.
You do this with deltas.
Okay, I see. Okay, so we have so this allows us to do a delta encoding, which I don't talk here about this. And so you only need to, in your request or somewhere, to specify your anchor, so your entry point, and then everything is 1 byte or 2 bytes over the wire, because generally your deltas are going to be very, very small.
Does that work if I extend the model and therefore end up with SIDs that are, many hundreds of thousands away? Surely the delta encoding means, I might be extending a base IETF type, which may have a low number early registration, but my extension's off in the private use space because it's one of my corporate identifiers. Then my delta is just as big as the original value. That's
Yeah, so in this case, the delta could be quite big. The thing is, as you said, so in the worst case, it will be not longer than just having, direct reference. So that's the worst case. What we will have is that very often when you have list operations, then your deltas will be extremely small. So, yeah, but.
Hi, Ed Bahrain, APL. Another question about this was, is there a reserved set of numbers or identifiers per namespace? So in the example, we have toaster with white bread and wheat bread, and then let's say that sometime later we decide that we have erroneously missed pumpernickel and we need to add it in. Is pumpernickel have a chance at being 2006, or is it going to be 76,000, whatever is the next number in the registry?
So excellent question. We're actually discussing around this. So what we want to do is have a very lean draft that doesn't overspecify some things. So typically this thing, that the question that you're asking, I would see this solved in the tool that generates this file. So the tool, the Piang plugin, will will indicate, for example, all instance identifier or identities leave me some space after them, so that in the future, if I update them, they will be consecutive. It doesn't come automatically from. So the question here is also, what is the algorithm for actually generating this, right? So we have an algorithm, but whenever, no matter how you look at it, I wouldn't like personally to go and overspecify it inside. Maybe we can specify it, of course, but I would like to finalize this draft, without wasting 6 months or 1 year, just looking at the best way to think out of the algorithm. Just put the minimum spec there and implementation.
Oh, no, and getting it out is important. The comment is some way of identifying groups would perhaps be useful. That's certainly something we're struggling with right now in the D10 working group, is the large text names have a grouping mechanism. The numerics associated with it, if it did also have a grouping mechanism, there are some efficiencies there. But to your point, if it's not coded in the spec and in the tools, maybe there's a way to do that too. So, thank you.
Okay, point noted. Thanks.
Peter van der Stok. Actually, I sympathize with the hierarchy argument, which is lost, but only looking at a hierarchy is too deep. So we have a number which is per module, and then we affix all the SIDs within the number within that module. So that means that SDOs which prepare their own modules can actually reserve the numbers which they are familiar with and like to do, and are not hindered by saying, I have this 2,352 number, instead of just talking about 352. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Casperman, if you really want hierarchical scheme, you know where to find it. It's called ASN1 object identifiers. If you know me, I don't normally recommend using ASN1 stuff, but the object identifiers, they got pretty much right. The encoding is a bit funky, but that's not bad. So what we're trying to do here is actually make a little bit of a breakthrough because so far people haven't managed to get these flat spaces to work. But if you look at it from a number theoretical point of view, of course, you can utilize hierarchical number spaces as well. And then you notice you actually spend a couple of bits for doing the delimiting between the numbers. And we are taking the same bits and just putting them in as reserved space, as expansion space. So when we define our toaster, we might have only have 3 types of bread today, but we still might want to allocate 1,000 SIDs for it, just to be sure, yes, we expect some expansion there. And if everything breaks, yes, then we have to allocate another range, then we get less efficient data, but it's just an efficiency problem. We're not creating something that doesn't work. We're just, by misjudging the original allocation, we are losing a bit of efficiency. We're going to spend a couple of bytes more. So I think that's not bad.
Just to finish this discussion, Rick Taylor again. I think the answer is, although we have some similar use cases, they are subtly different because the payloads we're talking about in DTN are considerably bigger than the payloads you're looking at in CoAP. So although we require the compression, we require compression across consistently larger data sets, and perhaps we have more of a flexibility requirement. But thank you for your answers, everybody. I now understand where you're coming from.
We'll certainly be very happy if you can reuse the things that we are doing. And
I came here specifically to see whether we could reuse this, and
yeah.
Maybe. I still need to work it through.
Yeah. And okay, so I'll try to move really fast here. So this is the fun part. So now that we got all these other things figured out, we come to the fun part where we actually went and we talked to Ayana, because as I said, we have this registry in GitHub now where we can, run our first interop meetings and our first prototypes. But the thing is that, okay, we want to have this, so we have this 32-bit space, and then we have a couple of identifiers in the beginning that are pretty special that we don't want to allocate them in the beginning. We will see in the future, and we must take a decision as a group how to do this. Then we have we reserve this chunk of 59,000 identifiers for publicly available young modules. Typically, these are all the things that will come out of from RFCs. Then we say, okay, we try with an initial 1 billion. Where it's given, and here we need to figure out exactly the policy. So we propose a first come, first served policy of allocation. And then we say, okay, we don't want to be too wasteful in the beginning in case we get something wrong. So the last 3 billion are reserved, and we will release them once everything else has been allocated. So how does it work? Because we need this thing to scale, and we don't want to overload the Ayana, and we don't want to centralize everything, where developers somewhere in China, in India, in Europe, in US have to go to one person to ask every time they actually release a young module. So what we propose is a two-tiered schema, or two-tiered way of working, where Ayana is the central registry of registrars, and there will be an Ayana registry for these SIDs, but also third-party registrars can go and can request to do this work. Typically, that will be SDOs, like potentially the Zigbee Alliance or others, and they will say, okay, we expect to produce, to be using this, and we'll be producing a young SID module, so we would like to have a chunk for us. So Ayana will say, okay, you have the chunk from, let's say, from 1 million to 2 million, so this one, it is you to register. This way, you know that, and from, for example, from 2 million to 3 million goes to the next registry. So this way, every one of these registries can actually allocate a small portion of the SIDs for the modules that they are actually managing, and they only need to ensure consistency within them. So I'm going to right now here. I mean, in the draft you have like the life cycle. I'm not going to talk too much. Please read the draft. So how you generate the seed file. One proposal that I would like to make here is that we split this one big schema that actually shows everything from creation of a YANG file, how you generate the seed, and then how you update it. So to split it into two. The first one is when initially you create a YANG file and you create the seed file. And then the second schema is, okay, once you already have a YANG file and a seed file, how you update it. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. So here the questions that are really interesting is we need to figure out the policy requirements that we will give to the third-party registrars. We want to avoid land grabbing and things like this. Yeah, people just go and say, okay, I want 10,000 modules. Please give me 1 million IDs, and then I do nothing with them. So these are things we need to figure out with IANA. We have some ideas, of course, but if you have, please take a look at them. So yeah, ranges of seats. Eventually, we might revisit some of the values. Maybe 59,000 are a little bit too little for the publicly available. So yeah, and there are passionate IANA staff, and we would like to have let's say HTOS scheme for the young scheme discovery, where you can actually go to the IANA central registry, and from there you can say, okay, I have a SID number 5,301. So I know where to go to see in which registry it goes, to go to the registrar and to see what this means for me. Maybe not for all young modules, because we want to have to allow to have a publicly, privately. I mean, this is like a requirement from companies. Not everyone wants to publish all of their young schemas, so we must allow for private registration. But at least for the public ones, it should be machine discoverable. So, as I said, read the draft, take comments, and we would really, really love to have the registry running for the IETF 99. So this is in July in Prague. So this means that in order for IANA to actually allocate the registry, we have to go for a work group last call around March, let's say, here. So of course, we don't want to force, and we will not force the group here, but we will do everything possible on our side to have a finalized document and to get your approval there. So please do read the draft and enjoy the nice topics that we're treating here. Thanks.
So if anyone is skeptical whether this can be made to work, we do have running code. We do have a way to allocate IP addresses. Those are a flat namespace. So at least the proof of concept exists. And now let's see whether we can make this work as well.
Sorry, Rick Taylor again. One last question, actually, Carsten, to you. I've just found your YID draft. Is that being discarded in preference to SIDS?
I think that's pretty much what we are discussing right now.
Okay. I like the YID draft, I'm just saying. I think that's more in keeping of what we need to use in DTN. If you decide not to use it here, can you come and talk to me, because it might have a place in DTN if you want to keep working on it.
Thank you.
Just a short note about the e-draft. So here we want something that is very minimal and that allows for different registrars to have their own policy. So what you want to achieve with the e-draft, you can use it here. So you just create a third-party registry and say, here the policy that we'll be allocating will be like this.
Rick Taylor again. I see the advantage of the YID draft as it allows you to address the hierarchy using a subtree style syntax. So you can say, I want everything under this as part of the request, but it depends a lot on how you're doing your RPC mechanism for your management. So I have yet to read through in real depth your management protocol suggestions. So it may be that the co-op management protocols, you don't have that concept of give me everything under. So if you don't have that, that's fine. You just use SIDS. But if you start to drift into, I want to filter by this, I only want notifications, and you start to get some expansion of what in traditional netconf and netmod is done with XPath. If you're trying to translate XPath into I'm doing this processing, then I think the YID approach is probably going to be more powerful for the processing aspects rather than doing masses of SID lookup.
I'm just going to say this so that there are no confusion. Yeah, and then we'll maybe I think we should go offline. So here you can do the same thing. The only difference is that in the YID draft you are limited to having your module being the size of the chunk that you give to a module being a power of 2. So you could say, okay, I know that the last n bits are my thing. So yeah, here we actually, when you look at it, the binary allocation, so that the fact to say, okay, I give to a module something that is the power of 2 is wasteful, because the module can, you may want 100 SIDs and you need to allocate, okay, 128 or something like this. But this is like an additional constraint that you don't need. You can just take the SID and say, okay, and you know that this corresponds to a module. It doesn't change anything that is a power of 2 or not. And you can say, I want everything under it. And it's the same.
I understand that, but I just think you're losing that structure which allows you to do the hierarchy work. But it depends on your management protocol, and I'll stop derailing the meeting.
Yeah.
So the question is whether it's really important for a node to be able to distinguish the higher level from the lower level part of the identifier. If you want to do that, I've got Rice-Golomb encoding for you, so that can easily be done. But that actually wastes more bits than reserving a lot of slack space in the SID encoding that we currently have.
I think for the DTN use cases, we're happy to lose that compression in order to achieve that little bit of power. But we have a different use case from you here. It's similar, but it's not identical. So I'll take it offline.
Thank you. Okay, Peter.
So this is about, this is Piet van Stok, and this is about the protocol part. This is version 10. The last version 9 was presented 1 year ago, so there has been some work done. So although it looks very similar, it is very different. Current version 10, what did we change? There's all these documents, and the COMI draft refers to those documents to show that the whole thing is consistent and be usable, and lots of the information which was originally in a much simpler fashion described in the COMI draft has been taken away, and we take all the power of all the other documents which have been generated. So let's hear. Well, we have the list instances. Young knows lists, and it knows instances, and how to access those instances has been simplified. This also means that the syntax differs a bit more from the syntax which is used in RESTconf. Oh, sorry. We need more content formats, so we are constructing together with Karsten content formats, and in relation with the patch and the fetch methods which have been specified recently in the Edge document. We have changed the query parameters. They are shorter. So instead of key, we use K, and we removed a few. And then the default handling has been minimized. So as has been pointed out already earlier, COMI specifies the basic access to the young servers. And all the Rust, which will be extras, how do you handle libraries, how do you do other extensions, we think those tools will probably be proposed as cool extensions. Yep. Any remarks about this? Is clear? So here I have some syntax examples. We have get C. C is returned by the discovery procedure. So you may use something else. I mean, it's up to you. We recommend C, and all the examples use C, but they are not normative. And then you have the instance identifier that we have the SID. We just have discussed quite elaborately. What we can do, so we get that SID in the instance identifier, and all the contents which is dependent, hierarchically dependent on this SID, is being transferred. So if you have this young structure, and somewhere half in the structure you have a list, and you have an identifier, and in the identifier you have all these other structures, then all those structures with this identifier for a particular instance are returned. Yeah. I think that solves that part. Yeah. Well, so the instance identifier can be, look, there are still some discussions about the any XML. I mean, there's some misunderstandings about what it means and what we are actually doing and what can be done actually in the files at this moment. So, because there's lots of dynamicity in this any XML, any data. Okay, so for the moment, this is still being discussed, in my opinion. So, some examples. Here we have example com, CA1, and that retrieves A1 is a clock node. So it have two leaves and the clock node is returned. Here we have return the interface. We have this module which is called interfaces. I think IETF interfaces. There's interface. It has this identifier, and you want one instance where this is called each 0. Actually, you can define that you want to have an instance, a particular instance, but only one leaf of this instant part. So that is then expressed here in the SID. So the SID says I take this identifier, this leaf from this list identifier, but it is this particular instance. Yeah. Okay. Same for delete, post, and push. So we try to be consistent. Yeah. One important aspect. Here what we return is we specify in the get the identifier, and we have in the content, we have the data node value. We do not have the whole thing, the identifier is the value, but only the value. Now, that works okay because you have the information about the identifier in the get, so that's an optimization that works. But if you get back the request, the contents, and you have the contents apart for debugging, that might be a problem because you don't know to which identifier it belongs. So that is just a discussion point. Do we want this optimization, or do we say, no, debugging is so important, don't optimize this? Okay, so we have patch, which is this document. For the moment, we have a set of identifier value pars, which are going to be transferred. It actually should be an according to the content format that we are going to be that is being specified at this moment. Yeah. Then the fetch, for the moment, and I think it looks very efficient. You use a CBOR array of instance identifier, where the instance identifier is first the identifier, then followed by all the key values. So easily, if you have a hierarchy of lists, then those key values start with the key values in the top of the hierarchy list, etc., and goes down. Yeah. So that looks very efficient. And okay, so that has been explained here. Yeah. Questions, remarks? You shouldn't do this, remarks? No? Okay, fine. So here also we have the RPC action. There has been 2 years ago, there were some questions about should we support it? Yes, we should. And so what we have, it's the input node value and the output node value. And there you don't need to say that's input and output. It is immediate in the specification of the get and the post. And then we have observe. Now, Young knows a fantastic way of doing notifications. You can specify notification formats and you can hang them to streams and you can have several streams, etc. Beautiful. We have simplified that a little bit. So for the moment, we have only one default stream. So everything is put to one default stream. But of course, you can specify additional streams if you like to. Yeah. And we have said that we want to do this with observe. So what you do, you say and get to a specific stream, and you will get in all the values. For the moment, we also specified that it is a one space memory, so you cannot go back forward into the stream for the moment, which is under discussion. Maybe we should have some ways to go back on the server itself on all its history, which says there. It means storage. Not everybody is convinced that it should be like that. I think it's a beautiful, cool extension to specify all that. Yeah. Another nice, cool extension is about what do we do with specific default information that we always like to have there. Like this is from, well, maybe some advertising on it, I don't know. Okay. These are an overview of all the difference with RESTconf. There is a special section in it because there was much unrest in the past about all the difference between RESTconf and COMI. So we have listed them, and it helps you in seeing if all the principles are enough conserved in this in this more simplified approach. Yeah. Oh, well, no. I hope it's complete in the draft. Here. So what do we have to do? Remove the to-dos which are made. The error handling has to be extended. I mean, there are some suggestions. There are some suggestions in RESTconf. There are suggestions to do it elsewhere. So it is still a bit open, although not completely. So as I said, the notification stream functionality, which should be in COMI, what should be elsewhere, etc. That is also going on. The discovery, should we have just a very simple discovery as it is specified for well-known core, or do we want more extensive, and how is that then managed, etc. I think it's a cool extension. Yeah, and I removed mistakes and typo huas. Yeah, so I do my best. I think this is it.
Okay, so who has read a recent version of the COMI document? So of those people who think this is the document we actually want to work on in this working group? Who doesn't? Okay, this looks a little bit like we have consensus for finally adopting this document. Let's verify that consensus on the mailing list. And yeah, I should have called out the numbers, but I didn't count. It was about 10 hands. Okay. 5. You didn't see my hand, so.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, Rick Taylor again. Clarifying question. You mentioned the notification mechanism for NetConf RESTconf. Have you been tracking the work that's been going on with what they're calling Yang Push, which is the sort of on-demand notification? Are you going to attempt to model that within this draft or try and extend it?
No, I have no opinion about that, how to do it.
May I suggest you go and have a look at it? They're doing some interesting work for sort of disconnected notifications, so you don't have to keep the subscription up. Seems to work well for a constrained environment.
It's Andy who did that as well.
Eric Voigt and I know Andy Bierman. Andy Bierman will know the right people to speak to.
Absolutely, yeah. So Andy is one of the co-authors, and it is in great support in all this work. I must
Great.
say.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So looking at the agenda, we are about 20 minutes behind, and we have 2 items here that OCF would actually like us to push forward. One is the redirect that Dave will be talking about, and one is the RFC 6690 update for prefix registration. So my suggestion would be that we do those in this order, and then if we still have time, then we can do the Yang lightweight M2M thing at the end. Okay?
If we're lucky, this will go fast. Who knows? Thank you, Christian.
You just did press the end presentation button.
All right. By the way, for background, we see at least 3 or 4 OCF key participants in the room right now. And so OCF came into a problem, but OCF agrees that OCF doesn't actually want an OCF-specific solution, right? OCF would much prefer that IETF recommends something, and OCF just does whatever IETF says. And so we'll mention some requirements here, but OCF doesn't actually have any requirement as to exactly how it's done, right? Whatever the working group consensus is, OCF will be fine with. So that's the context here. And so we'll talk about some examples of things and the questions or whatever, but the goal is that OCF doesn't want to fork and go its own way, right? Okay. So here's the problem that exists in OCF today, and potentially other ecosystems that use CoAP, is there's a discover message. It's a multicast get that goes out, and the response to that multicast message comes back with some information that's a PII. So for example, it might be a unique identifier that can be used to track the server as it moves around. So if it's a stable identifier, all right, that's one example. Another example might be if I get back information that says, oh, I don't know, maybe it's an insulin pump, right? That's a fairly PII, especially when we get into healthcare things. Knowing the actual device type or resource type can actually be PII. Okay, And so the question is, how do we prevent that in the response to the multicast get? So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. Okay, so here are 2 examples of how you might solve it. Okay, this is the first example. And so this is the one that is in the draft. The next slide is the one that's on the list. And so in this example, you can see there's 2 servers because it's multicast, right? The first server is one that is potentially a legacy one, or maybe somebody that's not privacy sensitive. It's trying to be public to begin with. And the one on the right is one that's intended to be privacy sensitive. Okay, so maybe it's a wearable or whatever it is that wants to be in this privacy sensitive mode. So in either case, the client only wants to send one multicast and get some type of response from both of them. Okay, and so the legacy one is going to send whatever it did before, which might reveal some information. The one on the right wants to generate a response that somehow tells the client to go, I don't want to tell you anything until you connect to me on the using DTLS on the following port number, right? So this is, he's going to discover the port number there, because it might not be, you know, the well-known port. Maybe he's using an ephemeral port for DTLS or whatever it is, right? So you have to be able to retrieve that. And so in this example, it's using a 301 as a response code. And then the DTLS exchange happens, and then he sends a GET, and then he gets back sort of the real content, but the real content is encrypted. Right? And so the key point is that the response to the multicast can't contain anything that would be sort of privacy sensitive, right? Now, there are 2 things to point out here. One, Karsten's main point is that you don't want there to be an attack vector where somebody can cause the client to go and sort of reach out to an arbitrary destination. Okay, and this is sort of the client state machine thing that I think was Karsten's point on the list. Okay, now it is worth noting that in the OCF context, or the problem that we're trying to solve here, there are 2 security mitigations that would make sense and mitigate the problem, I think. Number one is there a laser pointer on this one? Yes. Okay, is the IP address in here needs to match the source address of this. Okay, so in other words, you can only redirect for yourself. Okay, and number 2, the client in this example could only accept it if this particular IP address was on the same subnet as the client. Okay, so you can't just redirect to, you know, an address that's out there on the internet or something like that, which is one of the main constraints. Okay, so regardless of which of the 2 solutions we're talking about, whether it's this one or the one that Karsten puts on the list, which is 205, which we'll talk about, the assumption is that we could do that kind of security mitigation either way, which is you can only redirect yourself, and number 2, this is meant for on link, which just means that if you could respond to the multicast, which is this, you know, local proximal thing, then this means that you would have had to have an IP address in there anyway, and you could have responded anyway. Okay. All right. So that leaves us with the variations of exactly what goes into this message here. How do you actually signal back to the client that, by the way, here is this alternate URI that he should be using rather than the multicast one? Okay. How do I figure out the DTLS one? The second point is that the goal within the OCF discussions was that the server doesn't want to have to give, that's the right way to phrase this. The server doesn't want to let the application have to have the knowledge of which one it should have. Sorry, whether it's in this case or this case. In other words, the argument in OCF was that this message here should be possibly generatable by the COAP stack or maybe the OCF stack that's meeting on top of that. And the reason for that is just whether or not this resource path exists, or perhaps the query filter on top of here or whatever, whether or not that exists is actually potentially privacy sensitive. So think about what's the difference between a 404, say doesn't exist, and something like this. Well, the absence of a 404 is evidence that exists, and that can leak privacy information. Okay, so this is saying even if you would have generated a 404, you'd like to generate whatever this thing is instead. Okay, and so that's the argument for having it be done below sort of the resource handler of the application. Okay, before you actually check to see whether there's actually something listening in that particular resource, right? Because you don't want to admit whether this path actually exists yet. Okay, and I say path, I mean, you know, path or query filter or whatever, right? So if I said, show me all the things with resource type equals, you know, insulin pump or something like that, and I could see, oh, that was a 404 versus, you know, either somebody responded or somebody didn't respond. All those are sort of privacy leakages. Okay, so that leaves us with 2 questions. And so, by the way, here's the other one. Okay, this one is using a 205, and you know, here's the same information. And so, exactly how do you encode this? Okay, and so we looked at a couple other things, which I'm not going to walk through here. Okay, so I can use this one to talk about, because this is what's in the draft, and I can ask this as a question, because again, OCF doesn't care. Okay, so the first question is, should the response code be, I'll mention what the two questions are right now. Should the response code be, you know, like a 200 level, or should it be a 300 level? Okay, and remember, things that are 200 level say it's a representation of the resource, right? That's kind of the definition of 200. And is this a representation of the resource? Well, I think Karsten's point was, if this is something that returns link format, okay, then you could, in theory, say this multicat, the thing that you're asking for, OIC res, that resource has a list of links, and there's only one link. It's the link to the other OIC res. Okay, that's kind of the model that you described to do that. Now, that does reveal that you have a /OIC res to begin with, right? But there's nothing that would reveal that it's a you know, a particular resource type or anything else. You're just revealing that it's an OCF device, right? So this is Karsten's argument, right? He's nodding. Okay, great. I'm accurately reflecting that. Okay, so the first question is it a 205 or, you know, 200 level thing, or a 300 level thing? Now this one is slightly more generic because it works for things that don't return link format, but OCF only cares about this for the things that do return link format, right? So OCF could go either way. And then the second question is, how do you actually encode the specific URI to redirect with? Okay, and so the example in the draft is it's doing that in COAP options, you know, location scheme and location authority. All right, so we can say the location scheme is COAP S, and the location authority is where you get the port number, and it's implied that you know, you could potentially elide this part because you're redirecting it without changing the path of the query, even though there exist options for location path and location query either as well, that you might be able to omit those and say, well, the implied thing is, well, you just copy those, right? And so the argument for having new values here is that you could potentially do a stricter compression than returning something in link format. And the argument for link format is, well, it already exists, right? You don't need new options for that. So that's kind of the two things. And they are a little bit interrelated, right? If you return a 200 level error response, then the link format makes more sense, right? If you return a 300 level one, well, I should say, that's actually a debatable point. Okay. So I'm now going to ask these as questions because, like I said, OCF can live with it either way. So the first question is, now that you've seen some of the use cases, do we think that a 300 level or a 200 level is more appropriate? And the second question is, do we think that reusing the link format or having new option types is more appropriate?
Yeah, Carsten Bormann. We had a long discussion in, I think, 2011 on whether COAP should have redirect or shouldn't have redirect. And in the end, we decided it should not have redirect. And there are two reasons for that. Unfortunately, that discussion is only partially documented on the mailing list. One reason was simply that we just didn't want to have that state machine. But there's also a more fundamental observation that a redirect is a little bit circumventing the REST idea that the server is leading, but the client is controlling. And what here really happens is that there is a request, and the server leads the client and says, hey, if you really want information, look there. And in the HTTP world, many implementations, or I would probably should say most implementations, actually do this more or less automatically. So there actually is nothing in the client that actually thinks about this. It just happens. And I personally seem to think that that's really a violation of REST principles. It is the application that should very explicitly decide, I want to follow this lead that has been offered by the server. And having a redirect is kind of inviting the COAP stack developers to write code to do this automatically. And then we run into all the problems that we have with redirects in the HTTP world. Because this weird situation that the stack is directed to do something from the server that the client doesn't really have control over, that can be exploited in wonderful ways. So that's the philosophical reason, but I also want to reiterate, one strong reason was that we didn't want to have the state machine. And adding the state machine now seems kind of wrong to me. Now, on the information theoretical point of view, the two figures there were absolutely equivalent. So they convey the same information. The question is, how do we actually expect developers to react on the standardization we do? So this is a speech act. It's not a technical issue in the end, but it's how do we expect developers to implement this? And I see big dangers around redirects. Now, how to do a non-redirect solution? Can you maybe go to one of the exchange? Yes. So my knee-jerk reaction was, like Dave said, oh, that's an obvious application for a link format. So that's one thing I have in mind. Actually, you could do this link format type response to any kind of request. So you not necessarily actually reveal that there is an OSC res, but this could be something that is used by the server stack in just the same way that 301 would be used.
Agree.
Now, the link format has one interesting additional point because it can add attributes that provide additional information on how this CoAP-S thing is actually to be executed. Now, these attributes reveal something, so this may not be in the best interest of the server, but on the other hand, they also may simply enable the secure exchange to actually work. So there's a little bit of design spectrum here that the server has in indicating additional information or not indicating additional information. So link format sounds kind of a good way to handle this. The disadvantage, of course, is the IP address needs to be repeated and the path needs to be repeated in the link format. So we are spending a couple of bytes that we wouldn't have to spend in a more bespoke solution to this particular problem.
Yep, I agree with all that.
Matthias Kovac, Siemens. I'm not really sure if this redirect is really the right solution that you want. So you already for this problem propose a lot of changes that have to be applied, like, then we also need this, and yeah, maybe we can apply this rule so that the client really knows what to do. And I can imagine there are actually similar problems in other applications or also maybe within OCF. So I would prefer having this at the payload level with linking, web linking. And so, for instance, it also allows you to provide additional information. So, for instance, you say, yeah, you should use CoAP-S, but maybe there's also a mechanism that, yeah, and this is the authentication server you should use for that. And we are working in the Think2Think research group on exactly this, so having hypermedia-driven applications, and we actually have good starting points for that, how you have a better content format or representation formats basically for linking. So Corel is one of these approaches, and yeah, it gives you much more flexibility in how to solve that. On the issue that, yeah, it might reveal something, so I was thinking maybe it's a 400 actually that you want to return, and then have not the representation in there, and just tell the client, yeah, you did something wrong, but here's how you fix it. And then we also get in this what Carsten mentioned with, yeah, then we actually leave the control or the decision to the client.
400 is not a response on the multicast.
But 400.03, that's also not the 400.
Yeah, but you don't respond to 400s with a multicast for a multicast.
Yeah, you said you can't send a 400 response.
Then the multicast is okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there are a lot of details then, but like this is problem.
For multicast.
So I mean, this is a very specific problem here with the multicast. What I mentioned is like it's a bigger thing. You might want to apply something similar, like pointing to somewhere else or telling the client, hey, actually you have to do something different in many aspects. And yeah, so I think a more flexible solution would be better.
Yeah, it sounds like you were arguing for link format because there's already extensions that you can do there, but I'm not sure if I understood all that.
Yeah, so link format would be one to pick. I mean, it's the one that we have out there, but there are coming new approaches, and I would rather recommend to invest more work on hypermedia formats and getting this model right.
Michael Koster, Samsung Smart Things. Yeah, I'd like to add to that discussion also. I think the ambiguity in a link could be resolved by using a link relation that that says see other or something of that. I think there's something that's already registered that way, but to me, if we were going to use a link, and a relation would be very explicit and informing the client about what to do.
Dave Robin, I just heard a wonderful but scary thing, and that is the things like pointing me at an authentication server. I think is a great helpful thing to do, but it's also a PII problem.
Yes.
So you basically can't say anything helpful. I mean, this is this is, so it doesn't matter. It is a redirect to this. Now you can use core link format if you want, but it's basically saying, I'm not going to talk to you at all until you present me a certificate, some way I can authenticate you, COAP S. Now I'm going to tell you, oh, you can't actually talk to me without talking to that authentication server over there, blah, 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 blah.
Yep, I think
So
that's an
there's
excellent point. Yeah.
while adding the parameters to link format is a neat feature of link format, it's also a dangerous one for if the point of this is PII.
Yep. No, that's a good point. That to avoid revealing anything, you'd like every server to respond with exactly the same answer, right? Other than IP address and port number, right? Because anything else between, right? And so I will mention what's in the document that is not part of this working group. Is all that happens right now. There's a separate problem which I asked CFRG to worry about, which is what happens in this DTLS exchange right now is typically in the DTLS exchange, one side reveals some stable identifier to the other right now. And so that's a job for CFRG because there are known algorithms that solve that, but they're not in a standard or code bases yet. And so that's exactly what's talked about in the security consideration section right now. Okay, so what I'm hearing right now is that there's general feedback to use the 200 level and link format is kind of what I'm hearing so far. And the question is, if we do that and we have, this and things like discussion of the IP address has to match the source address and so on, if people liked those, then the question is, regardless of which solution we go through, I guess the question is there something that the working group would like to do to solve this problem? Or are they saying, yeah, it's something that OCF can go and do? Okay. And so the question is there a task for this working group or not? I actually can't tell based on the discussion so far. So, even if it's just, advice or something, I don't know.
So we just had one very interesting example yesterday in the discussion where we had this proposal of a 206 response code, talk to me later, which I think is a very similar situation where really this talk to me later thing is another case of the server leading the client, but maybe actually the talk to me later information needs to be augmented by some additional information. And I think we could have a draft on these leading responses from servers that lead the client to do something specific, and that would just be one example for that. That probably would be an informational document in the end.
Yeah. So it sounds like there is something for the working group to do. Now, it might not be based exactly on the document that I wrote, but it sounds like there is something that the working group could do here that's useful, provide guidance. Okay, I see a couple nods there. So
Brian Rosen-Newstar, generally speaking, your problem is not a unique problem. That OCS problem is not unique. PII is a big issue for a lot of people.
Yes.
And I think that we don't want lots of different solutions, even different minor variations of the same solution. If we're serious about protecting PII, then we want, if you have to protect PII, do it this way. And I think that means work here.
Yep, that was exactly the discussion in OCF that says it's not an OCF specific problem, and we think IETF should provide guidance how to solve it, not OCF, right? It said it's not really specific to us. Yeah.
Yes, plus one to that, and just to avoid what you were saying that OCF would be forking to different directions and the rest, we should really.
I definitely don't want them to do that.
Exactly. So I think this is a generic enough problem. Yeah. Makes sense to do it at the IETF.
Okay.
So who would be willing to contribute to such a document? Eric? Oh, lots of people. Eric, Christian, Jen, Brian, Michael, Shinhyuk, Dave, and me.
Okay.
Okay. Christian.
So we said that we're going to skip ahead and use the last minutes for the other OCF request.
Okay, so between the Berlin meeting and now, I was made the IANA responsible for, or designated expert for, interface and resource type registrations. So basically, currently now we have a policy that says each separate interface type and resource must have a separate registration with IANA. And between Berlin and now, I had something like 80 resource types, and OCF has indicated that they have several more hundred resource types that would like to register. So potentially there's going to be hundreds, thousands of these registrations. So I'm going to be obviously pretty busy, and I'd like to minimize my workload. So it's not only my workload, IANA has a workload. It's going to lead to delays. And these delays will possibly mean SDOs won't bother registering their code points at all. So what I'm proposing is that we allow for organisations to register a organisational prefix. So they basically have some sort of prefix that has something to do with their company. So you can't, if you Google, you can't register Microsoft, etc. These registrations would be specification required. They would need to have a specification that says how they do the numbering. Ideally, this is a publicly available document, and also they have a publicly available registry. And that they, in their document that they say they comply with RFC 6690. So there was some comments from OCF that they would support such a thing for their registrations. They also came up with a proposal which isn't in the draft, to have a prefix such as X, which would allow a reverse domain name to be registered, as you can see there. So it's basically a way of allowing a resource types without registration. The incentive to register is that, of course, that if you register, you get a shorter name. So that's basically the proposal.
Carsten, do you remember correctly that we already can use URIs in these places?
Yes, yep.
So that wouldn't really add any value?
No, that's the same.
Dave Taylor. So right now, my understanding is OCF is currently choosing to not use URIs because they're much less compact. Right? So they know that they can, but currently they are choosing to disallow the use of URIs and use registered ones instead. And that's why they're all being registered right now. And just as a data point, there's a bunch more in the pipeline. I'm told that there will be probably another 40 or something related to healthcare and things before the end of the year. And so it's really workload on the designated expert, right? OCF can keep pushing batches after batches and batches if that's what the working group wants them to do. But the designated expert has to know that he's signing up for that. And so, but yeah, OCF specifically prefers to not use URIs, but yes, they know they can. Right now, the OCF spec just says, don't do that.
I was just reacting to the proposal to do this X-dot thing. The X-dot thing doesn't add any value. The other thing, of course, we should discuss.
Well, so I wasn't around at the time that the OCF spec was written, or at least not part of OCF at the time that it was written. But my understanding is right now they say vendor ones should use X-dot, implying that you register it with X-dot whatever, just like it's any other string, because it's more compact than using a URI. You could drop off the prefix and so meaning the scheme name and so on. So it's more compact than using a URI. So like I said, I wasn't around at the time, but I understand that they did that for compactness. But because yes, you could do coap : / org dot example dot whatever, or you can just do x dot example dot whatever and register that. So
you replace 7 characters by 1.
Correct.
Actually 2 by 2.
Something.
Yeah, so it's not that big of a difference. So nothing stops IBM from registering com.ibm.foo. So they already can do that, and if they really want to, they can register x.com.ibm.foo. The X, of course, creates a knee-jerk reaction. There's actually an RFC that explains how the X dash thing. Don't do that.
As I said, it's not in the draft, but through discussions with OCF, I said I'd put it in the slide set and communicate it.
I would have pretty negative feedback.
Yeah, that's fine.
Brian Rosen, I think this is a bad idea. I think you've got a problem. We should solve the problem, but doing it by creating a lot of different namespace spaces means a device which is a OIC temperature sensor is not a device which is a, I don't know, XYZ HIPAA temperature sensor. And that I think would be really unfortunate. I think that we ought not to balkanize the namespace, that if we have a processing problem, let's fix the processing problem and not balkanize the space.
But we have that problem now anyway. There's nothing stopping OIC having a temperature sensor and one M2M having a temperature sensor.
That's already the case.
It's already the case. That horse is already bolted. So unless we have something when we're talking more about interface descriptions that we have something to say like this interface is like, or, you know, point to another one which is basically the same, that horse is bolted. So I don't think this problem makes it any better or worse. So.
Yeah, I actually think that's a lousy answer. I mean, if the horse is bolted and we think it's a bad idea, then let's go and fix something. If we don't think there's any way in heck to make this work, then don't use a registry. Just let anybody put any name out. What the hell? Who the hell cares?
I think you have some more slides. Maybe you want to show them before I ask my question.
No, just those two. Yeah.
So can you back to the previous slide, the one before the OCF one? There is a should on this slide, where I actually think we should go one step beyond and not only make this a must, but also specify how the organization that gets a prefix actually exposes this information to users of CoAP. So I think it's important that, for instance, when you go to the INA page that has the interface types, you have a link on which you can click, and there you get something that is reasonably machine processable. Maybe we can specify it, how it should look like. I don't know. I mean, if there are hundreds of these things, it would be really great if I could run semi-automatic process to actually get them in and find the specifications for them and so on.
Yeah, 100% agree.
That's a little piece of work that we maybe should do. Describe what the designated expert should check at this point about the reference that the third-party organization provides.
Yes.
And maybe OCF can provide us with an example of how they would be doing that. How would you expose your interface types? Both.
Both. Yeah.
I'm not sure which question you're asking. The OCF's question is really about resource types, not about interface types. But maybe Christian would like it for, if he would like it, that is, for both of them. But I'd say the thing that we would expect there to be very large numbers of, on the order of the number of, say, URI schemes or service names or something like that, if we look across all the industries out there, I would not be surprised if the number of resource types started to rival the number of URI schemes and service names and TCP port numbers and things like that that are out there. That's the scale that we're talking about. Okay. And is that something that the designated expert is taking on? If so, OCF is fine with that. Good luck, Christian.
This is Pete Resnick. I really want to amplify what Brian was saying before. Just because I happen to make Pete's wonderful dimming light bulb, and I call it that, and Dave makes Dave's wonderful dimming light bulb, which is obviously completely different because it has wonderful features that mine doesn't. And by the way, mine has wonderful features that his doesn't. Screw both of us, right? Eventually, the folks who are doing management software and all the other stuff are going to say, fine, but if you insist on calling it something stupid, I'm not managing it the way every other manufacturer does it. And so you can be the loser in this marketplace. We should not create protocol that is supposed to be about interoperability that decreases interoperability. It's a bad idea, a really, really bad idea. Let's not do this.
Alexander here. So I completely agree with this. And right now we are hearing a lot about OCF coming, can you hear me?
What is this?
Alexander Pelov, yeah?
What is this? You agree with him or with him?
Yeah, I agree with what is being circling around here, that we should not just go and register every identifier just because you didn't really find exactly the thing that you wanted, that you intended to. What I feel is that the people from OCF, they actually want to build a system. So they will not, if we just leave the answer like, you should not do this, but, we cannot figure out another way to do it, then they will just pick a solution and go for it, even if it's not the best solution that we consider. So my question here would be, what is the roadmap of OCF for this? If they need to use this in a month, then I don't feel that, if they need to push out the specification and say, okay, anyway, this is the way we do it. So what is the roadmap for this? When?
Just coming in from the...
I'm not authoritative, but I know the answer to the question. OCF is an organization that standardizes specific resource types. They standardize what it means to be a light bulb and what it means to be a thermostat and so on. That's what their organization is. And so they standardize a long list of them. Okay, there's nothing in this right here that OCF is blocked on. Okay, because nothing in here affects the protocol per se. This is just the procedure for registration. Okay, and so what happens is if this not get come, if this is not done, then all that means is that OCF continues to register, which a huge number of them are registered right now. Christian processed 70 or something like that right now,
yeah.
And there will be another 40 before the end of the year, and another 40 after that, and so on and so forth. So OCF can do that, right? It's just that's the only thing we're talking about here. But OCF standardizes each individual schema individually. That's what the SDO does.
And the issue is that the only guidance given to the IANA expert, which I have to follow, is that the name is basically a character, lowercase character, followed by a string. That's all. I can't look at what's in the interface description. Doesn't say whether I have to look for, resource or interface description. There's no checking that I have to do. All I have to do is basically, if the name is right, then they get an allocation. So that is the fundamental problem.
Yeah, I was just asking because also, at the end you have a question: do we want this or not? And if we, I get the impression that even if we say no, they will just simply say, okay, but do it like this, and we will treat it like this. So at the end, I'm not sure how much they will care about.
Yeah. So.
Michael Koster, Samsung Smart Things. I totally agree that we have a bigger problem here in that there's, OCF can define a temperature sensor, and someone on IPSO can define a temperature sensor, and we're going to have non-interoperable silos. And I think here in IETF, we need to make a choice as to whether we're going to enable that to a greater extent, or try to figure out how to not enable it. I'm not sure we're really the right venue to try to solve it. So I'm not actually proposing a solution, but I think there is a problem, and I think we do need to be careful here.
Yeah, Cosmo, I think we have this problem in many registries. And what actually has happened in many cases is that the designated expert doesn't exactly execute the instructions by the letter, but actually does apply a little bit of discretion and just asks a few questions and so on. So is this really needed? Because it looks very similar to this, whatever. But on the other hand, I think we have to be careful with putting too much pushback into our registration mechanisms, because that just means people are stopping to use it. They're either squatting the code point, or even here in this case, they don't even need to use the code point. They can just use a different attribute than RT and do their thing on a different name. So I don't think we win anything by creating too much pushback on this registration. And it's probably not easy to find a very good balance here.
I just was sort of looking at this, that it's really just a namespace, and you register to make sure nobody else is using yours and stopping collisions, basically. But
Brian Rosen, I I have a fair amount of sympathy with the problem. I don't want to be you. I might help. I mean,
Probably that for a long time.
I might be willing to help, and maybe there's a bunch of us that are willing to help. There's no protocol police. There's nothing we can do to make it perfect. I think a partial answer to what Karsten just said is, yeah, you can do all of that, but the management system might not deal with it if you do. And I do think that we've surfaced a big problem. There is no simple answer. There's no perfect answer. And yet, my sense, I mean, I'm not a chair here, but my sense of the room is a lot of people are uncomfortable with making this be out Wild West. They really would like a better process that encourages fewer variations in names. So maybe we have to rethink advice to the expert. Maybe we need a directorate or some group of people who are the experts. Maybe there's a whole bunch of other things, but it seems like just saying anybody can come up with any name is the wrong answer. But that means that some of us, and I rarely get up without willing to do some work. So that means me and a bunch of other people who have said things, have to sit down and figure out what the right answer is. Let's not try to be perfect, and let's try to be a lot better than we currently have, because I sympathize with what you're stuck with. I just don't like the answer you gave, which means we got to come up with a better answer.
Tim Carey, Nokia. So what you're asking is an administrative authority to understand the semantics of the resource types and interface types, and they're not going to be able to do that. It's not as easy as that. Believe me, I've been living this for the last 4 or 5 years. It's not, you cannot do that. You cannot put the onus on the administrative authority. Now, if they need help in terms of all these people bringing all their stuff, and wanting to register these resource types, we need to give them that ability to do that, to ease that administrative burden. The semantic piece of it, how do I make sure a refrigerator looks like a refrigerator, whether it comes from Samsung or LGE or GE, is a different problem that shouldn't be take over what this is addressed. He's just asking for a way to remove the administrative burden. And before we've done this with registries, we've always allowed enterprise organizations to have a way of defining their little world of things. And so that's been done in other places as well. So I fully support this type of thing as a way of easing the administrative burden, and I would encourage the group to think about that other problem of how to make the semantics of the things that we want to register, have the semantics of that in a simple, consistent way, and separate the two from this. Right? We can't force these guys to be cops because they're not qualified to be cops.
So we are about 7 minutes over the end of our meeting.
Dave Taylor, I agree with that, and I think Carson's point shouldn't be underestimated. So I wanted to give a comparison to what happened with URI scheme names. URI scheme names also used expert review, and what happened is everybody just started ignoring that and using unregistered scheme names. And so then there started being a Wikipedia page to track all the unregistered ones so that people could look them up on Wikipedia. And so Alexia and I got together and says, well, this is dumb, right? The primary source that people are going to is Wikipedia, not the IANA registry, right? We think people should be going to the IANA registry. So Alexia and I said, well, gee, we have a process for third-party registrations. Let's third-party register all the Wikipedia page schemes that everybody has done, and so then we can make the Wikipedia page list go away. That's what we did, and there was, 70, 80, 90 of such schemes, right? And so if you look at the URI schemes, most of them on there are registered by Alexia and me, and they're because there was an incentive for people to just go off and squat on space, okay? And so I don't actually think the biggest problem is OCF here, right? Because OCF will follow whatever the IETF recommends. You want them to register, OCF will go and register all of them. It's all the other vendors that have vendor-specific ones that is the problem, because that's what was the problem in the URI scheme case.
Yes, when the word semantics popped out, I had to jump up and say, yeah, this is a problem that certainly BACnet and the Facility Smart Grid Information Model team wrestled with for a long time. This is ultimately a semantic tag that we're overloading with all kinds of meaning. We we had two things that we did to solve this. We don't want to squash innovation by saying everything has to come through a central thing. We agree on one central tag list. So we do allow namespaces, but we also allow you to have multiple tags. You can have multiple tags on one resource. So I'm this thing, I'm also this, and I'm also that. That was one way of solving it. But that's, of course, possibly burdensome, and you ship the device and it can't attain a new tag in the, because it's burned in its firmware. So the other solution that was mentioned was a big repository mapping file of this tag equals that tag, this thing equals that thing, this thing is that thing, well, but it's the units are different. And then, but we got into a discussion, it's not a strict equivalence, it's this is equal to that as long as this is also present. And so we actually produced an equivalent, we had an equivalency tag thing. This tag equals that tag. And we realized it's not just equals. There's more to it than that. This tag is these three tags, but not that one. So anyway, I'm saying is we went through all this brain damage. It got complicated, but still the direction we're taking is we're letting vendors do whatever they want with their namespaces. And the idea is that we'll figure it all out later as the market falls out, either by applying standard tags in the future and those old legacy things won't work, or the legacy things will be brought into the family with this giant agreed community mapping file that attempts to bring them into the fold.
Yeah, I think we had similar discussions at the semantic interop workshop that was held earlier this year. Versus Adams. Yeah.
Okay, Alex. Yeah, I think I'm still trying to figure out from the listening to discussion if we have any kind of directions and actions. I think one potential action is we probably need to increase size of the expert review team in the short term, probably to help with the load. Is it fair?
Yeah.
Well, these are the three people suffering. So, do we need more people on the expert review team?
It's not a problem at the moment, but the potential problem is it could be very
we can
large.
watch this. The other thing is we need to think whether we should come up with the working group recommendation for the expert reviewer, potentially. And yes, well, I suppose I don't hear consensus to change the registration procedure. We, going for first come first serve would be a very easy choice, and just let them sort out. But I don't. We probably need more discussion about whether we want first come first serve, allow for namespace prefixes, or just more recommendations for the expert reviewers, as we do. But for now, I think we probably need more advice to expert reviewers.
Yeah. So I think that the golden way forward is more recommendations for the expert reviewers, and have a relatively high threshold prefix registration. So organizations we kind of trust to get this right, like OCF, could get a prefix. If we have the working group recommendation, we expect them to follow them.
It sounds like there's consensus that something has to be done and it's broken, but how we fix it, we have to work on. I think we just have to go out of this meeting, and I'll try and get interested parties to come up with some sort of draft.
Pete, I hear some tension between, well, do not do it, it's your problem now, and people there saying, well, we need some help. You cannot just say, well, would you like to volunteer to be another expert?
So we've got to vacate this room now.
Yeah, we definitely need to have a follow-up discussion on the mailing list on this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That was a can of worms. Hey, one question. Why not just domain specific registry or something like that, like based on organization, like OCF has some entry points or why don't you just register like high level, like, and just do OCF